I feel bad putting this series off for as long as I have. A show set in feudal Japan featuring samurais with a supernatural folklore twist? Not to mention a decent studio backing the project. Besides the fact it stands out on premise alone against the sci-fi military schlock tsunami this season, there was a lot of bait this series had to hook me in from the start. But for one reason or another, packing the wrong horses. This one found itself by the wayside. That is until now. So, let's answer the question, is Dororo good? I talk a lot about first episodes and the impressions a series leaves the viewer with. Either poor pacing, not enough substance, or simply wasting the viewer's time with pointless crap. I'm looking at you, Wise. But for once, I get to praise the show for having a phenomenal start. From the outset, Dororo offers a clear, concise narrative with a backstory for the series that grabs the viewer and frames the central conflict. It's told with stunning visuals and zero narration to hold the audience's hand through what we're watching. Definitely the strongest start of any show I've watched this entire season. Not to mention it's a slow, steady feed of information that keeps me coming back for more, as characters, the setting, and story are all explored at a brisk but not overwhelming pace. Basically, I cared about the characters and their motivation from an early point, which is a surefire way to keep the audience interested. So congrats on accomplishing your goal, show. If you're into the samurai genre and can't get enough of feudal Japan for a setting, this series has a ton of beautifully choreographed fight scenes at the ready. Sword fights are always cool, after all, especially when delving into the highly stylized samurai flick aesthetic. Not on par with something like Katanagatari, mind you, but still a feast for the eyes. This fight in the first episode on the bridge is just so fluid and fast, but still able to keep up with the action. The fluidity of each movement and weight of the blades come across in each blow. Each slice feels so smooth and quick, just how you would expect a katana to cut. The unique circumstances for the main character inform his fighting style. Him using two swords attached to his prosthetic arms leads to a lot of fun and exciting moments in the series. In case you missed that, I'll point it out. A distinct issue evolving from the character's backstory informs not just his personality, but how he fights. Major props on doing something different, especially since this doesn't feel like a gimmick but a facet of the character himself. So I mentioned Katanagatari before, and I do feel this copies some notes, though they're not exactly unique to Katanagatari itself. The structure of the story, focusing on practically isolated adventures of the main cast, battling a foe to regain something in a linear progression, sets up the basic outline. But where this series breaks new ground is that instead of focusing on the monster of the week, it gets intimate with the characters and their relationships with one another. Seeing the brotherly bond form between Hyakimaru and Dororo build through the episodes from strangers to meal ticket to friends is genuinely gripping. The point where Hyakimaru saves Dororo in episode 4 when he was sure he was going to die and changes how he refers to Hyakimaru, switching to brother, just feels like a major moment in their arc as respect is formed rather than given. And characters who are connected aren't necessarily outright stated until later, giving the audience a smug sense of satisfaction for picking up on the hints laid out. It really shows a certain level of craftsmanship that I appreciate in a story. But for me, the biggest draw this series has to offer is the horror aspects. If you're into Japanese folklore and monsters, there's plenty to be had. It reminds me a bit of Mononoke in that regard, with imposing monsters needing dealt with, usually with a slash to the face. The art aesthetic and foreboding scores sell each encounter expertly. I personally love Japanese monsters as they relate heavily to the culture of a given area, feeling far beyond any mortal's capabilities. Usually brutal and relentless, but still sapient, leaving you, as a viewer, drowning in a sense of sadistic dread, which does lead to the hype when they are inevitably defeated. Catharsis in a nutshell, ladies and gentlemen. And where there's Japanese monsters, there's dark, depressing horror to go along with it. This series doesn't shy away from dark themes, blood, and mature subjects. The action is brutal with close-ups on gore, but where other shows often resort to this as some grab for attention, I feel this series honestly couldn't be told without the bloody imagery. Rather than being edgy for edgy's sake, mutilation is shown for character development over shock value. The lead being born without limbs, skin, or senses is in a quest to regain them, so the series would need to be gritty lest it come off cartoonish. Honestly, Hakimaru's inability to feel pain at the start of the series leads to some raw moments later on when the sensations come back and for the first time in his life, he knows what it means to be hurt. It's echoed again in episode 5 when he regains his voice, letting out a massive shriek in pain. Raw is just the best way to put it. It leads to an interesting dynamic, one I think is the strongest aspect of this show, where even when coming out on top, the lead regaining his senses can put him at a disadvantage in future situations, as he has an entirely new element to grapple with. This just shows that the source material knew what it was doing when crafting realistic drama and conflict, setting up a poetic idea that the more human Hyakkimaru becomes, the harder his journey is. So just about everything this series is doing is fantastic. Even the slower episodes of this show have been far more engaging than the best of many others out this season. It's nice to see an updated take on a classic manga that deserves the amount of care put into it. Though perhaps I'm a bit biased, as this series ticks almost every box for what I like in a show. Interesting relationships, dark and depressing themes, Japanese folklore, and feudal samurai sword battles. If you can't tell by me gushing about this show, of course it's good. Check it out, because this is definitely worth your time if you have even an iota of interest in any of the core genres of this series. Definitely one of the best shows out this season, and possibly one of the best ones out this entire year. Hey, you made it to the end of the video. Please like, comment, subscribe, and do all the other YouTube stuff, because that really helps me out. Thanks for watching.